From the beginning of starting CFBU until today, how have you changed the most?
Oh, you can go first.
From the beginning of starting of CFBU until today, where have you changed the most? Definitely in my understanding and augmentation of history. I don't know if I viewed history inaccurately, but I definitely viewed it inadequately. I just had kind of this narrow slice of history. I think since meeting Monique, it's like just added to it, making that a bigger slice of the pie. So I think that has been the biggest thing for me, is just learning about things like the Tulsa Massacre and redlining and more details about Jim Crow laws and
how Jim Crow even started.
Yeah. I knew about the Black Renaissance, but I didn't know a lot about the things that happened in the wake of Reconstruction and how Jim Crow laws arose. So, there was some things about Black history that I knew. I didn't know about the origin of the Black Church, that church in Philadelphia. So that for me was just a lot more information and understanding the structural things that were in place, like for redlining, for example. I didn't really have any knowledge about that. In terms of information and framework, I didn't know anything about the critical theories, critical social theories, critical race theory. For a year, I stumbled around. I didn't even understand what she believed enough to go Google it. And
she's talking post our formation of CFBU,
no, I think,
right?
No, from the starting. I'm counting even the starting of our friendship.
Okay.
Because that's what ultimately led to the start of CFBU. We were about a year in. I thought maybe Monique held to some peculiar postmodern ideas, but I didn't know it had a name. And then when I listened to a really old podcast with Elisa Childers and Neil Shendy, and Neil explained it was called critical theory, then I had a term I could go type into Google and start researching it. And so that was all new for me. What about you?
I would say my views on abortion. If you go back through all of our videos, we never talked about some things. We didn't talk about LGBTQ+. We did not talk about abortion.
We didn't talk about police.
We didn't talk about police.
A long time.
We didn't talk about systemic racism. There were a lot of things where I was just like, no, we will not. And it was because my views, I didn't know where I landed on a lot of them. On, I guess, some things I was like, well, I can see a possibility, but I don't really know. And so we didn't talk about those things. Abortion, I was quite clear.
Because you were fairly pro-choice.
No, not fairly. I was all the way pro-choice. I was like, no, we won't talk about that because,
I'm pro-choice.
Yeah, basically. And it wasn't to not talk about it to hoodwink and bamboozle people. I just didn't want to have the arguments and all of that came with it. And we were still having a lot of back and forth on our own. And so, yeah, I felt like, though, once I convinced her to come over to my position, and of course we could come out and just be like, this is where we stand. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Y'all, pride. When you want to pray for me, just pray that the Lord continues to grab my heart. But so those, I think, are the things that I've really wrestled with.
It was hard, on the police issue, for example, because I really wanted to do a show on policing, and I kept saying, well, what if we interview this person or this person? And you're like, no. And then finally, so what we did was we would, on issues you were still thinking through, we would have private Zoom calls with experts.
Yeah.
And then you could talk, ask questions, work things through. And then, so that was sort of how we moved through those issues.
Yeah. And I really didn't want to hear it from someone who wasn't a minority. So I was very still stuck in this idea that knowledge about Black issues had to come from someone who was Black or at least brown. So gosh, you guys, there were so many things that I had to change my mind on. Changing my mind on abortion, changing my mind on what I thought about LGBTQ plus issues. When I'm coming from a space where some of my friends are drag queens, and in that lifestyle. What else did I change my mind on?
Since we
Oh,
started.
a lot of systemic race issues. I have, there are some areas where I think, sure, as Christians and believers, or as a nation, we could do better in looking at some issues. But there's a lot of issues that I'm like, you know what? Maybe we're just not asking the right questions. How does someone coming out of the critical social theories kind of reconcile their minds around the fact that critical race theory and the critical social theories aren't the way, but then you also have this disconnect, or this disparity in things like Black infant mortality rates? There are other questions that should be asked in relation to Black infant mortality rates, or the maternal mortality rates. What are the things that cause Black women to have complications during pregnancy? We have a higher percentage of what is it called, preeclampsia, and things like that. Like, what are some of these issues that are impacting Black women in childbirth? It doesn't always mean that just because there's a disparity, it's automatically racist. And that was something that I had to really do some research on and study about, and even just getting into some of the fallacies, understanding what fallacies were and which ones could possibly be at play right now. So, yeah, I think those are some of the ways I've changed my mind.